Hi, folks. Welcome to day 4 of the U.S. Pirate Party Conference. I'm joined today with Hunter Rand and Laura Gattis, who are going to discuss the future of our labor rights, what states' labor laws apply to remote workers. So this is day 4, and we still have many days to go. Um, and if you have any questions or comments, please do put them in the chat and I will forward them on to our speakers. Additionally, you can check our back catalog by going to uspirates.org and clicking on the 2022 conference link. And there'll be all of the videos, both what have already played and what will play, all in one nice, easy place. And as always, you can check us out at uspirates.org. You can also like, share, subscribe, click that bell, all the regular stuff. So without further ado, I will leave it to the two of you. Please, Hunter, Laura,
Thank you very much.
tell us.
My name is Hunter Rand. I'm a partner at Eddie Weston and Company. We're a multimedia agency, and Laura, um, I don't know if she's going to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Laura. I have a background in marketing and remote work, and I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Oregon, where I'm studying biased media coverage in Republican communities.
And one of the things that I'm encountering as a business owner, and Laura and I have encountered in the past working together in a marketing office, is kind of remote work, and this is something that a lot of journalists have to deal with, a lot of staffs at colleges have to deal with, especially athletic staff. But COVID kind of exacerbated the idea of remote work and brought attention to a lot of problems that have existed for a long time, but weren't commonly dealt with in the court system, weren't currently commonly dealt with by insurance companies, and weren't commonly dealt with by businesses. And that's something that's new. Kind of the prime example again, and this happened about 5 months ago in Germany, and I'm just reading from my notes here. In Germany, their laws are very pro-worker, and your commute to work is covered under their version of workers' comp. And a gentleman was working remotely because of COVID and slipped. He got out of bed, he slipped, fell, he broke his back on his way to his laptop, and the German court ruled that technically that was his commute even though he wasn't on the road, he was in a different federal district because that constituted his commute. It should be covered by their version of workers' comp. The business should be responsible since the business is the reason he got out of bed and was walking to his laptop. Um, that is not an example, though, that is close to home. I'm based in Nevada, Laura's based in Oregon, and something that is happening right here in Las Vegas, and I say right here, Las Vegas is about 8 hours south of me, but is Formula One. Formula One is coming to town. They're going to do a Grand Prix on the Las Vegas Strip. They just finished up in Miami. And one of the most interesting things about Formula One is remote production. That's something that we do. And in Formula One, their broadcast center is based in the United Kingdom. So all of the television programming, all the F1 programming that you see is coming out of the United Kingdom. They send their camera feeds from wherever the racetracks are all the way to the UK. And so here's a question I have for you guys to kind of ponder, whether you're watching this now or later, but a question for you guys to ponder. If a UK based technical director gives an instruction to a camera operator in Las Vegas and that camera operator gets hurt, whose laws apply? Is that technical director going to be held accountable, or are they going to hide behind the borders, right? What happens if that that camera operator in Las Vegas gets killed, right? Whose laws apply? What company is ultimately responsible for that? Is it a shell company that was created to hire people in Las Vegas? Is it Formula One? Is it the Las Vegas Visitors and Convention Authority? And unfortunately, there is an answer to that, and that answer is workers are not really protected, and it's how good your attorney is. And I think Laura has a bit to say on that.
Definitely. While we're talking a lot about like specifically workers' comp from injuries, I would say that one thing that happens a lot in the US is even things like unemployment rules can vastly depend and you can end up getting underpaid. So I worked for a company that did a lot of layoffs. They were incorporated out of Florida, but they had remote workers across the country. And they were able to abide their unemployment rules by Florida's laws, which were a little bit looser on paying out unemployment versus some of the states that these people lived in that had higher costs of living and more stringent unemployment rules. But because they weren't actively living in the state of Florida, nothing applied to them, even though all their paychecks, all their health insurance, all of their retirement funds were coming out of that state. They still had no protections for the place where they actually lived with their families. And I think you see that a lot now, especially in the age of remote work, as Hunter can attest, living in Reno, where he's acquired probably quite a few Bay Area transplants over the last few years. And it becomes a question then Nevada, which laws vastly differ from those in California, trying to figure out then as we move in all of these both tech workers that work at home, but also these manufacturing workers that produce at a lot of these large companies in rural Nevada, trying to then sort out what is the future of labor for them and are they actually benefiting from legal protections from their company, or is their company able to exploit them and move them to states where maybe they have looser laws and they will get away with lower payouts and lower like quality of life in their company?
So when we talk about workers' kind of rights, we can talk about unionization, we can talk about things like that. But for me personally, one of the most important rights is the federally protected right to go home, to be safe, to not get killed at work. And I have a personal belief that we are all unfortunately replaceable, and so we should not get injured for an employer that will replace us next week if we can't do the job. And so the question is how are those rights federally protected? How is the law enforced? And so in 1970, Nixon signed into the OSH Act, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, which created the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And a lot of people give a lot of crap about OSHA. A lot of employers do because, to be honest, it's very hard to comply with their rules. Right now, my business is 100% remote work, and we just got in trouble because we weren't displaying the OSHA poster. And my question to them was, how do I display the OSHA poster for all of our workers to see when we don't have everyone's just at their homes? And their answer was to send me one poster for every employee and every partner. And so that's an interesting way to go about it. Um, OSHA's done a lot of great things, though, because they truly, over the years, they've gained a staff with a wealth of knowledge and a staff that truly cares about workers. And they've done things like standardizing exit signage. And they've given states flexibility to be stricter than them. So 22 states have something called a state plan, and Nevada's one of them. And I'm going to use Nevada as an example here because I'm most knowledgeable about Nevada. Nevada OSHA is significantly stricter than federal OSHA. And so in Nevada, we do not have any federal representation for OSHA, but we do have Nevada OSHA, which is funded about 50% by the federal government, but all the employees are state employees. And they take the federal rules and they enforce them, but they also create their own. They are beholden to the state of Nevada and our legislature here. And interestingly enough, Nevada has some of the strictest rules for the film industry. We're one of the only states that requires OSHA cards for the entertainment industry, the film industry. So people working at concerts, people making movies. And what that has created is an environment where workers are protected. A problem that we have is if a production is less than 15 days, because it's less than 15 days, those workers are not required to get OSHA cards. And since a lot of them are coming from California, for that period of time to work on a film, to work on a television show, to work on a television commercial, and because they're not required to get an OSHA card, they don't necessarily know the rights that are entitled to them from the state of Nevada or from the federal government, the rights that protect them. And I think that's something that's incredibly important because a lot of companies are taking advantage of that, and then taking advantage of employees. We just had a large production finish in town, from a large company that does streaming and has physical properties as well, and that company had a poor safety record. Um, when I look at all of the local film and media production companies, it's an almost perfect safety record because Nevada is so strict. Um, a lot of this came out because in 2014, a woman named Sarah Jones was killed on a film set, in, I believe, Georgia by a train. The film was called Midnight Rider, and the producer and the director lied to the staff, saying that they had rented the train tracks when in reality they had just sat there in a car to figure out the train schedule. This one day, the train was late, hit Sarah Jones. She was dead. Another crew member lost a leg. The director and the producer are in prison. And that started in 2014, kind of Nevada looking at like, hey, how can we not ever have that happen in our state? And so, unfortunately, we all know Helena Hutchins was killed by Alec Baldwin with a real firearm on set. A lot of us in Nevada looked at that and said, hey, that would never happen in Nevada because that's just illegal. You're not supposed to have a live firearm on a film set. Violates OSHA, Nevada OSHA rules, Nevada OSHA regulations, and everyone working in Nevada with an OSHA card would know that, unfortunately. And so a lot of out of state companies are taking advantage of that, bringing in employees that don't know the rules in Nevada and saving money that way. Laura.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, guys. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties in the background here. But one thing that also comes up when you're talking about OSHA is also understanding then that OSHA is not all encompassing, nor was it ever intended to be all encompassing when it was created. So there are entire industries that are left out of OSHA's guidelines. And one of those big ones that we often see is called MSHA, which is the Mine Safety and Health Administration, which has a huge presence in Nevada because they do have a huge mining economy. And when people get nervous about OSHA guidelines and things like that, it's also important to remember that while these guidelines can feel impossible to meet for small businesses, especially during the COVID era where these guidelines were changing on a day to day, they aren't meant to apply to everybody. And depending on your industry, you may actually be applicable to a different set of laws and safety guidelines. So, for example, the Mine Safety and Health Administration that operates in Nevada and in many other states has a completely different set. They go into the mines, they check for different levels of safety. So while your safety levels may be high in your office and it may sometimes feel redundant, and in some cases it can be, it's nowhere near as stringent as what it could be and what in some cases people were lobbying for prior to OSHA splitting and also creating MSHA for these mines and these high risk environments that just sort of needed a different set of guidelines. But that said, following OSHA guidelines can be cost prohibitive. And I think that that's one area where we struggle when we talk about the future of labor is figuring out how you encourage small businesses to keep safe, healthy environments for their employees without sacrificing the financial side of that puzzle, which is you do need to be able to turn a profit. And if you are a small company that's working remote, do you really want to spend money on OSHA guidelines to fix someone's house or do a payout if somebody slips and falls in Germany? Or do you want to put that money towards other things that help grow the profit and allow your company to continue to develop and better the local economy and the local community you work in?
So here's an example here. in 2019 at a Buffalo Wild Wings, a manager was killed and 13 others were hospitalized after being exposed to fumes from cleaning chemicals that were accidentally mixed. And it's really interesting to note that OSHA investigated and found the company responsible. That's an easy one because they have a business license at that location. They have a physical presence, and most of those employees probably live there. But when we're talking about remote workers and interstate kind of situations, um, things get kind of complicated. And so now we want to talk about limb and body part payouts, kind of a really dark thing. Um, you know, I know that something interesting always to talk about, historical pirates losing limbs on the job. But what happens is when you lose a limb on the job, you're typically entitled to a payout. There are payouts by state, and there are payouts by the federal government if that company is interstate. And the question is, are you being properly compensated by the state? Is it falling back on the federal limit, which is sometimes lower than the states, or are you getting the most that you can get? So, one of the most valuable body parts is an arm, because if you lose your arm, you're probably also losing a hand and five fingers. Nevada values arms at the most at about $860,000. So if you lose an arm, you will get $860,000. And I'm rounding here. It's $859,634. It's a very specific number, and it's supposed to account for lost wages over the rest of your life. Um, Kind of take care of you. The lowest amount is Alabama. If you lose an arm, you're entitled to $49,000. So, what if you're an Alabama employee working in Nevada? Would you get the Alabama payout or the Nevada payout? Or would you get the federal payout, which is $588,000, less than Nevada's $860,000? And the truth is, once again, because these are very rarely handled situations, very complicated situations, it would most likely be up to how good of an attorney you can get. When we look at Alabama, I am sure that the company will initially try to pay you out at their rate at $49,000. And if you challenge them, they might go up to the federal, but they're going to put up a fight for you to get that Nevada amount if you were working in Nevada. There are payouts for all levels of body parts. ProPublica did a piece on it in, I'm looking for the date here, 2015. So the amounts have not really changed to keep up with inflation, but arms are the most valuable. Laura and I were joking earlier that they do list everything from each finger separately, to an ear, to an eye, and they even include a testicle, which, full disclosure, from I believe 2000 to the present, every groin injury that has been reported to OSHA did result in a death, unfortunately. So no one has gotten that payout. But it's really interesting when you look at this and then you start questioning yourself and you start looking at business practices of some of these companies. One that I can think of off the top of my head was a company that was hiring college students at the University of Nevada to sell pesticide services or extermination services door to door. And what they did is they had people come to the University of Nevada. They signed people up to go to a training. The training was in Salt Lake City, Utah, and that's where you sign your contract. And then they send you to Ohio to do the job over the summer, and not even getting into the predatory um, nature of the contracts and the housing and whatnot. Just looking at these are people that legally live, they're registered to vote in Nevada, they reside in Nevada, but you're taking them to train them and sign their contracts in Utah. So are they a Utah employee or a Nevada employee? And then you're shipping them off to Ohio or another state. And, I have heard of people getting injured in those situations, and the answer is, um, none of those situations were resolved in a way that was really great. It was really up to attorneys. Unfortunately, it's not standardized, and unfortunately, whoever has the better attorney, which means whoever has more money, wins, which is not an ideal situation. And I think Laura saw a lot of those companies um, operating at Nevada, um, and at some of the other schools I think you've worked at.
Absolutely. I think it's become something that is a much larger problem than people give credit to, and I think it gets really underreported, and that's something Hunter and I were sort of talking about too, not necessarily earlier today, but in the past, is like we talk a lot about these problems, and even him and I certainly don't have the solutions for it. We're not labor law experts, we're not experts in corporations, but it's then how do you start to fix these problems? And so that's sort of what we're hoping to do today, is to bring a little bit of awareness to them, because part of this too does come down to advocating for yourself. Whether or not you're in a union vastly depends on that, but you may not be in an industry that has a lot of unionization going, and you may be left to advocate for yourself in some of these situations. And so it's important to know that some of these are problems that you may face, hopefully before you are actually facing them in real time and are scrambling to make up that lost ground to, quote, fill in the gaps for what you don't know about how to defend yourself, and make sure that you are getting the most legal rights that you deserve.
So to continue on that, I just want to say number one, Laura and I are not attorneys. Laura is a PhD student. I am a small business owner here in Nevada. Um, but as a small business owner, these are things that I've dealt with. And Laura is a union leader, and these are things that she's dealt with. Specifically, an example is we have a contract in Colorado. So we're traveling to Colorado in June, and we're driving. So we're driving from Nevada through Utah and then into Colorado, and we might hop down to New Mexico. Um, Something that we discovered is, since we're based in Nevada, we all have Nevada addresses. Our company is based in Nevada. Nevada OSHA, to an extent, follows us. So even though we'll be in Colorado, we'll be kind of at odds with OSHA there, because Nevada has much stricter rules. One of the things we have to do is we have to declare to our client our OSHA cards. We have to show them to that. I've already warned our client, and our client has no idea what we're talking about, because that's not something you do in Colorado. But in Nevada, it's something that we're required to do. We have to prove that we have all the safety training as required by Nevada OSHA and state law. So it's kind of an interesting situation. And as we expand into Colorado and open a Colorado office and hire people in Colorado, even though they're not necessarily remote workers, because they'll be working at a physical Colorado branch and they'll be based in Colorado, since Nevada OSHA follows us, all the people that live in Nevada and are traveling to Colorado to work, does Nevada OSHA apply to them? Do they have the same level of protection as us? Or do we have more protection simply because we live in Nevada, and they have less protection because they live in Colorado? And these are questions I have gone and I have talked to an attorney, and his answer was, no one's asked me that before. It's a complicated thing, because a lot of these things are handled case by case. And again, we're not attorneys, but our advice to anyone is to think about these situations before you encounter them. And if you are in a situation, the first thing you should do would be to find a qualified attorney that practices in that area. But again, we want to start a discussion within the pirate party and even beyond the pirate party, about labor, because a lot of people don't realize that these mechanisms in government exist, that these rules exist. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard of people getting injured, and because they don't know their rights, their workers get off free, or sorry, their employers get off free. Um, so right now, looking at YouTube chat, Anthony J had commented that he didn't even know body part payouts were a thing, and that tells me that this type of training is not kind of out there enough in Nevada, and this is not true in every state, but in Nevada, school teachers are covered by Nevada OSHA. And when a teacher stands on a chair, falls, and breaks their arm, which happens more than I'd like to admit here, um, typically the responsibility of that is on the school district because they did not train that teacher. This is the process of getting a ladder, or this is the process of having a qualified employee hang something up for you that's heavy, or help you put up decorations, right? It is on the employer to do that. That is not true in every single state. In states that don't have state plans, OSHA does not cover state employees or local government employees. It only covers federal employees and private employees. And so school teachers are not covered in every state. And so if you're in a state without a state plan and you're a school teacher, you should start researching, how am I protected? Or um, can my school take advantage of me? One more very pertinent example is in Washoe County. I did teach high school for 2 years through COVID, thinking I could help with the teacher shortage before I returned to private industry. Because of COVID, they put a cleaner in all the classrooms that was purple. I don't remember the names. And in my classroom, they gave us a 64-ounce bottle. They gave us a spray bottle with no instructions. There were no labels. And I researched this product because I was suspicious of the school district and I was suspicious of the spray bottle. And on the safety data sheet, something else that people don't talk about, the safety data sheet has instructions for how to handle chemicals, how to handle batteries, right? Batteries in your phones can explode. So imagine industrial batteries for commercial vacuum cleaners, or the larger ride-on vacuum cleaners, right? So the safety data sheet said to not put it in a spray bottle. 15 minutes of skin exposure can kill you because it's the concentrated amount. It's 1 ounce of the concentrate to 64 ounces of water, and I had 64 ounces of the concentrate with no training or instructions on it. Um, and the my favorite part on the safety data sheet was an instruction to firefighters that if there's more than 10 gallons in a building, to let the building burn because it can penetrate the breathing apparatus on a firefighter. And so the school district was putting that into classrooms, and so teachers filed an OSHA complaint. OSHA came in and forced the school district to remove those chemicals, which, interestingly enough, they sold to a hospital, um, which is where that chemical should probably be used properly. So, anything you want to add, Laura, before we move to the last part of our conversation?
I don't think I have anything to add. I think you've done a really good job of raising some issues that, again, I think one thing that continues to happen, and we know this in friends, family, community members, and you hear about it in the news, is just not being aware that something is a problem until it's too late. And now you are either fighting for yourself in court, or you're not fighting for yourself, either, internally with your company or externally with the government, because you just didn't simply understand what your rights are. And for me, that's what keeps coming down to, is not necessarily just advocating for yourself, but also advocating that your company or your organization or your school district does a better job of training everybody equitably to make sure that all people are provided with the information to be successful and to live their job safely and go home to their families.
So, I see we have some people in the chat. I know some people had followed me on Twitter, so thank you, and retweeted me. And I wanted to go ahead and open up this conversation for questions from anyone, anywhere. Jamie, I don't know if you have questions as well, but anyone can ask us a question. Um,
So one thing I remember, maybe midway through the pandemic, when there were a large number of people who were working, or are certainly larger than normal number of people who were working from home, was the state of New Hampshire was suing Massachusetts to go and say that residents who worked for Massachusetts companies did not have to pay Massachusetts taxes. They lost. Um, because of course the corporations and their offices were domiciled, well, not domiciled, but existed in Massachusetts, and that's just the way it is. But how does that work with other states? Do you have an idea about that?
It's complicated. I think what we have to remember is, and I'd love to see a pirate candidate go for one of these positions, but I believe in most states, if not all states, the attorney general, who is the person that has the authority to sue on behalf of the states in a civil or a criminal court, as a plaintiff or a prosecutor. The attorney general is an elected office, and so something that we see is a lot of posturing. Right now in Nevada, a situation that we have is a company called North Shore Clinical Labs, based in Chicago, allegedly defrauded Washoe County and the state of Nevada. They missed 96% of positive PCR tests for COVID, and they got paid out for about over $164 million. This is another story on ProPublica. I love ProPublica. All of their articles are really well researched. But North Shore Clinical, that article has 3,000 emails, and text messages, and it implicates the governor of Nevada staff. It implicates a lot of people, and right now most of our government in Nevada, we're primarily a blue state. Our governor's a Democrat and our attorney general's a Democrat, and the attorney general has not really said anything. The governor has released one statement. Everyone's pretty quiet about it, but the federal government has launched an investigation, and really the only response from the governor was, "You won't need a subpoena. We'll just hand everything over because a subpoena will do the same thing." But it's really interesting to see the attorney general in Nevada pursue some things so aggressively, and pursue other thing or not pursue other things. And it's Nevada's a really interesting state. Um, I would describe Nevada's not really the best example for that because we've had a Republican governor and now we have a Democratic governor, and in the wake of the Las Vegas shooting, gun rights were never on the table, regardless of who's in power, Democrats or Republicans. Raising taxes is never on the table, despite um, having Democrats in office or Republicans. So Nevada's not the best example. Um, but I think with attorney generals, a lot of it's politics, a lot of it's getting reelected. So you're talking about Massachusetts suing New Hampshire and over taxes. I
New
would
Hampshire sued Massachusetts, actually.
New Hampshire sued Massachusetts. Apologies. And
We,
I
we,
look at
we actually have income taxes. New Hampshire just has a high property tax and no income
okay.
taxes.
Whichever attorney general was suing, over taxes and trying to um come out ahead, presumably for the people, might have known that they would have never won, but did it for political capital, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think in some situations it can mean a lot, especially if we're talking about lawsuits that benefit underrepresented people. We can talk about gay marriage, transgender rights, um, people of color. Um, you know, showing solidarity, but sometimes it's just straight up political posturing. It's um, you know, Texas suing the federal government over the border when the federal government, I believe, constitutionally has a right to administrate the border how the federal government wants to, right? It's kind of an interesting question of states' rights versus federal rights. And Osha has come in and allowed states, they kind of lay out a minimum, right? Here is the federal minimum. If you guys want to take it further, you guys can take it further and we'll fund it. And that's so a bit of state rights. Nevada is one of the states that took it, one of the 22 states, and said, "Hey, we're going to take your rules and we're going to make them stricter." And unfortunately, Nevada historically has a poor safety record. There are OSHA inspectors that have, I want to say it was 10 years ago, an OSHA inspector fell down an elevator shaft because they were trying to cover up an open elevator shaft. And it's a really sad thing. And now you'll see OSHA inspectors walking around with a big stick hitting the ground in some of these high rises. Um, Anthony had asked, and I hope that answered your question, Jamie. Anthony had asked, where can we go to learn more? Are there any online resources? And the answer is yes. Of course, your state, if you have a state plan, you'll have to Google that. But federally, osha.gov, osha.gov, osha.gov has a lot of resources. And these resources are not just for employees, not just for the people. These resources are for small businesses, large employers. A lot of what they have on there is free. So I was talking about
Hunter, are you there?
OSHA posters. Uh-oh.
Laura?
Yeah, we will let Hunter go with his technical difficulties for a moment. OSHA is a really great resource, like he was saying. Another one that I think is a good resource sometimes is the Library of Congress has a really good research guide for beginners on employment and labor rights.
Oh,
Again, both from your perspective as an employee and from your perspective as maybe a small business owner or management. I'd also recommend a website called wheniwork.com. That's also a website that has a good list that will help break it down by states for you in their blog section. And that'll help direct you to things like human resource management, industry specific publications that may be tracking the individual law changes for your state and its industry. Another spot, too, especially if you're looking for legal help in those areas, is always the American Bar Association. They have a section dedicated to their laws, which I tend to think can be a little bit wordier than what the average person wants to dig into. But if you are really passionate about that, you can. They also will help you find lawyers that are experts in.
uh-oh.
Sorry for the technical
Oh,
difficulties we've been having, folks.
I'm back. Sorry. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, yes.
I don't know what happened. Laura's in Oregon and I'm in Reno. So I don't know what happened. But I heard a little bit of what Laura had to say. So I do apologize for the
Hold
technical.
on just a second. There was
Uh-oh.
further technical difficulties, and I'm just going to go reset things up.
I thoroughly apologize.
Oh, no worries.
Let me know. Let me know when we're back.
And I think we're back
Live
now. So
streaming is on.
Wonderful.
now we're back.
So
So sorry about the technical difficulties, folks. I guess it must be real then. So
I
please continue, Hunter, Laura.
I would to tie it back in, I think we'll conclude. It seems like because I know it's my internet too, so I do apologize. But to tie it back into the pirate party, one of the big platform pieces of the pirate party is putting people before corporations. And the problem with that is corporations have a legal obligation to make money for the shareholders. We can look at Twitter does not want to sell to Elon Musk, but when he made an offer that was profitable, they have to sell to Elon Musk, right? Because it makes the shareholders money. Cutting corners, tax avoidance, all those things make more money, and that's why businesses are inclined to do it. And so the idea that I want to leave you with personally is the idea that treating employees right, compensating them properly, protecting them at work can reduce turnover and in the long term save money. And on the books, it might not look like that initially, right? But if you can reduce turnover um, it will save you money in the long run. Running my business, I can tell you, training a new employee costs a whole heck of a lot more than um, giving someone a raise. So I'd rather give someone a raise than have to hire someone, do a search, go through the hiring process. It costs me about $500 to process an I-9. Even if they're qualified for the job, we still have to train them for our workflow. And that's about another $500 in labor, 500 to $1,000 in labor, depending on what rank they are. I'd much rather just give someone that money as a raise, and then they're happy. If they're happy, they talk about it, then people want to work for us. I don't have to search for people. And I think Laura's experienced that. Um, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
I don't know if I have a whole lot to add. I just think it's really important, especially as we're going into a large voting season, to keep this in mind as you're picking the people that you choose to vote for. And I know a lot of states right now don't have active parties for us. So I think that if this is something that you're passionate about, you can make this something that you fight for as you work on maybe developing some of our parties in some of the states where we're currently inactive. I know Nevada doesn't currently have an active party, and I know Oregon's is currently inactive, but used to exist and be fairly active. So I think it's a good opportunity for you to like sort of add this to your ballot of things that you really are passionate about. And even if you don't have anybody from our party running for office on your ballot, to take this into consideration when you're looking at the stances that people have, because sometimes the stances that people are running on will leave out labor laws and the rights of you as a worker out completely from those conversations. And so that's something to keep in mind, is making sure that the people you do end up voting for in this election cycle are people that are going to fight for you and your beliefs, even if they're not necessarily from our party, which, as we know, oftentimes can happen as we are still growing. So it's something to keep in mind as you like move forward with it.
And I think one kind of final um, idea that I want to leave you with, less of a platform idea, but something you guys, anyone watching, can do is be involved with local politics and talk to the candidates. Don't just Google them, don't just read interviews. In Nevada, most local candidates put their personal phone numbers, or a phone number that you can actually reach them at, on their websites or an email. Most local candidates will actually get back to you. I will admit, I do work in politics. I do have lots of clients that are candidates right now. And I'm always advising against it, because you always have someone calling you and leaving a death threat in your voicemail. But a lot of local candidates everywhere are consistently put personal contact information on their websites. And so I would encourage you guys to reach out to your candidates, reach out to the Republicans, reach out to the Democrats, and see which candidates want to put people before corporations, which candidates want to open up government, which candidates want to defend privacy. We have a candidate, I'm not going to say who it is, just for the purposes of being objective. We do have a candidate in a local race here in Northern Nevada. There's about 150, so you guys can figure it out. And this candidate has a certificate in data protection from a 4-year university. And that candidate wants to apply that to one of the local government entities that recently lost a bunch of data to someone putting the password as um Nevada. I'm gonna just say the password. It's already out there. Nevada, all lowercase, 1234. A newspaper published it because it was silly. Um, you want candidates who want to promote culture and knowledge through copyright reform, right? I think public art is important, and in Nevada, um, and I think Laura would echo this. We have a unique position of hosting Burning Man, and the amount of government money that goes into art here is truly, it's a lot, but it's amazing because it funds the jobs, and a lot of this art is owned by the government. The space whale in downtown Reno was just purchased by the city, and it was made right here in Northern Nevada. There's a 747 that drives. It has no wings, and that was made right here in Northern Nevada. So it's truly amazing when you have candidates that believe in the pirate platform or the pirate planks. What can happen in your communities? I think any final questions from anyone? So thank you all for participating and giving us time. I hope that you found this conversation enlightening. Hit us up on Twitter. I'm Hunter Rand NV on Twitter. Laura, I don't know if you want to share your. You don't have to.
My Twitter is at the Great Gattis, but you can probably most easily find me in some of Hunter's recent tweets. I'd
Yes.
also say that there's some talks coming up that we're really excited about too. So we'll probably be attending a few of them. Specifically, I know Hunter is very excited about the state of the Fourth Amendment with, I think, Alex Marthews. I'm going to butcher that, but there's some other really good talks coming up that I highly recommend you guys check out because we personally are very excited for them.
So, but
Yeah,
thank you.
Alex Marthews tomorrow. That's going to be great.
Wonderful. But thank you guys for having us, and thank you for your time.
Thank you both for joining us. We appreciate your observations and advice. And as always, folks, stay tuned. Tomorrow we'll have, as Laura said, Alex Marthews from Restore the Fourth on, talk about the Fourth Amendment rights. And then we have other things Saturday and Sunday, a whole set of stuff lined up. So I want to thank you both, Laura Gattis and Hunter Rand, for speaking with us today. And as always, you can find us at uspirates.org. You can find all of our videos at uspirates.org or the playlist that this video is associated with, as well as, share, like, subscribe, find us at US Pirates on Twitter and on Facebook and wherever else we are. So thank you both very much. Thank you, folks, for watching and interacting with us. Hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the evening. Take care. And we are clear.